right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to let folks continue to join. We may get a few more here this afternoon. It feels like almost back in the pandemic. I'm working from home today. The CMA Fest in downtown Nashville sort of would have felt like the pandemic, so we decided to close the office and work from home today to avoid all the traffic and the tourism going on. So glad you could join us this afternoon. Some of this we talked about here were things that were discussed in the Education Committee meeting at the conference up in Gatlinburg, but we know not everybody's able to do that and able to attend that meeting. But wanted to run through some things in general. I know you're deep into your budget process right now and working with your school board. Thought it'd be time to do a good overview on what is and isn't required of you with regard to your county school budget. Obviously, that makes up 65, 70% of most counties' budgets out there, so it's a significant expenditure. You're under certain mandates as far as what the state law requires you to do on education funding, but then there are other things that you aren't required to do. So thought it'd be a good time to run through some of that. Starting in generally, we always used to talk about under both the BEP and now under the TCSA funding formula, two things that a county commission has to look at when they are funding the education budget. We've got something that I call it's almost like kind of a difficult marriage in Tennessee, in that we have a school board that puts together a budget and sends it to you all. The school boards here don't have taxing authority. We're in the minority states in that matter. There's only about 13 where the school boards don't have their own taxing authority, but they put together a proposal for a budget and bring that to you and ask you to fund it. And really the county commission is in a position where you either say yes or no. You've got certain things that you have to comply with as far as state law, but you don't have the ability to go in and line item change things in the education budget. So if you may reject what the school system brings to you, they may say, we need another $500,000 this year, and you don't have that or don't intend to improve it that much. You can tell them no, and then they have to go back and make changes as to how they think they want that to fit into their budget. With regard to the funding formula, since education funding is funded by both the state and local governments in Tennessee, the state sends money down to you and they set certain conditions on what you have to do as a county. The two main things we talk about are your required local match, and then what's really more significant usually is maintenance of effort. So the state generates something as a whole, and it's a little bit simpler now under TCSA than it used to be. There used to be different components, and some were funded at 50-50 split, state and local. Some were 75-25, some were 70-30. But now where we are under TCSA, everything in the base funding for a student, which is up to $7,075 this year, and everything in the weighted funding for those individual students is supposed to be shared statewide on a 70-30 split. What you pay individually as your county is going to vary, because that's where fiscal capacity comes in, and they look at what is your ability to raise revenue locally. So if you are a jurisdiction like Davidson County, Nashville, where there's a lot of tourism, we've got all the folks in town today, they generate a lot of sales tax revenue. If you're Sevier County, places like that, your required percentage you put in may be up more like 50% of the total cost. Whereas if it's a small rural county with very low tax base, your actual local funding you're putting in may be 18-20% of the cost of your school system budget. So that varies from county to county based on your ability to pay. But overall, the base and the weights of the TCSA funding formula are supposed to be funded 70% state, 30% local. Most jurisdictions in Tennessee, the local governments are putting in well above what they're required to. So the important number isn't so much your local match as your maintenance of effort. And the maintenance of effort requirement, state law, basically says that you have to put in at least on for the operational budget for schools, you have to budget the same amount of money as you budgeted for them last year. There is a second level test that can happen, that if you're a school system with declining revenues, the Department of Education can also approve a budget where you may put in less local dollars so long as you're putting in at least the same amount on a per pupil basis. So if you lost 100 students last year, you could reduce your local funding, but you still have to at least meet your local match requirement, and then you have to put in at least the same per pupil amount as you were in the previous year. So those were the two things we used to always talk about, your local match and your required maintenance of effort. What has become more significant now, since year before last, the legislature passed a law saying we're going to increase the state's minimum salary schedule. The governor's got a goal of getting that minimum step up to $50,000 by I believe it's the 25-26 school year. I'll show you what the state minimum salary schedule looks like. There's been a lot of discussion about this, and part of why we're meeting today is because the State Board of Education met last Friday, and they adopted this new salary schedule. So hopefully you all can see that. As you can see, this is a fairly simple document. It sets for this year the base minimum salary for a teacher with a bachelor's degree and 0 years of experience at $44,500. Then you can see for teachers with 1 to 5 years of experience, they're supposed to make at least that base plus $645. From 6 to 10, it's the base plus $3,370, and then 11 to 15. There's also 2 categories, bachelor's degree and advanced degree. So teachers that have a master's or a higher degree of education get additional payment on top of that. So this format of a simplified schedule was adopted back under the Haslam administration. And the talk back then was saying we don't want to have it. It used to be a step where there was each year there was an increase. So there was an amount that you had to pay for a teacher with college and 0 years of experience, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year. And what we'll talk about in a second is that schedule really, so what the state uses as its format is different from what most local school systems use. And I can show you a copy of what a typical, we met with Sullivan County last week, and this is what a typical county salary schedule adopted by your local Board of Education looks like. So you can see here, they now have steps that go from year 0 all the way down to year 30. With teachers getting a bump in pay every year. There's a standard for a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and then further on educational doctorate degrees. So they make distinctions in different levels of advanced degrees, and also they give a teacher an increase every year. That's what probably your school system is going to look like, because I understand most of them tend to have at least a 20-year step, if not a 30-year. And so your school system is likely, when they adjust that bottom level of the overall salary schedule, going to look to raise teachers across the board. Let's stop sharing that one for a second. Let me check. We've had a couple of questions, I think, show up in the chat. Let me see if we have, okay. Looks like things are straightened out. Maybe somebody couldn't hear for a minute. So like I said, that was the Sullivan County schedule. The State Department of Education, State Board of Education, when they adopted that new salary schedule, they take a look at what the cost increase is going to be for doing that. And they have done an analysis, I'll show you that now, for this coming year for going to the minimum step of 44.5. And these materials are all out on the State Board of Education's website. We can post link to that after the session. And they go by county and identify those counties where they have some teachers who are making less than what they think they would need to comply with that step. So for instance, the first one listed there is that Bedford County, they think there's about 64 educators in their school system. Their starting salary for Bedford County for this current year had been at $44,225. So they're going to have to bump that up to the $44,500. That, along with some other steps along the way, are going to end up requiring them to give raises to about 64 educators, but they're only estimating the cost of that raise to be about $17,480. So this is something I know we've heard from some counties. Some of you are already getting your intro teacher pay up to the $50,000 goal that the governor has set. I said that isn't something like you got to get to 44.5 for the minimum this year, then it goes to 47 next year, and then it goes to 50 the year after that. So I said, you don't have to hit that at this point, but we've got some counties wanting to go ahead and get there. We've got some of you who were paying in advance, where these things were even prior to this law being enacted. But wanted to make you aware of the fact and the differences that you see between both what the state salary schedule requires and what your local school system does. let me pause there and see if you can post it in the chat or if anybody wants to unmute and have a question about those things we've covered. All right, doesn't look like we've got any right now. So I said that it used to be you really had to focus on what is your required local match and what is your maintenance of effort. Now you also kind of have to take account of what raises is your school system going to be required to pay to the teachers that are currently within that school system. I'm going to find real quick the link to the State Department of Education's website and post that in the chat so that you can find where the state board posts all these materials. So if you go, post this in the chat, sorry, I'm trying to do too many things at once. If you go to that website I've linked there, that links into the State Board of Education's archives of their meetings, and you can click on individual meetings. So the one where they adopted this minimum step of 44.5 was a week ago on May the 31st. You can click on that meeting. They've got a long agenda, but down there you can scroll through it and you can find these items. If you go back and look, usually it's the meeting towards the end of May each year when they adopt a salary schedule. So for the last couple of years, they've been doing that and posting that out there together with an analysis of how much they think that's going to cost your school system and your county. Another thing we can talk about is what's going on generally with TCSA this year. So let me see if I can pull up a handout we had from the May conference with our education committee. Hopefully you're seeing that now across the screen. It says state budget investments in K-12 education. The state this year in its budget said they needed to put in an additional $261,254,000 to fund the improvements in the TCSA funding formula. That doesn't tell you exactly where it all goes, and it's not entirely clear where it all goes. They also were putting $30 million into a summer learning program that was to replace some money where they had been using some of the TANF dollars the state had, and the federal government apparently objected to that after some initial indication they could do that. So they put in some money to cover that hole in case they weren't able to use the TANF funding. They put about $15 million into the charter schools facility fund, which is something charter schools can apply to get for renovation or purchase of facilities for charter schools. Then there's the big ticket of $141 million that was put into the budget for the Education Freedom Scholarships. That was the universal voucher program that didn't pass, but the governor had that in his budget, and at the end of the session, the legislature chose not to cut that out, even though the legislation didn't pass. As it says here in this first paragraph, so what they ended up doing with TCSA, they took the base per student, which was $68.60 as of last year, and they raised that from $68.60 to $7,075 per pupil. That's the total, and that is shared on a statewide basis on a 70-30 split. Then that funding there also can trigger some certain weights per student. So a student can qualify for additional weighted funding if they are in circumstances where they're economically disadvantaged, they live in an area with concentrated poverty, they're from a small school district, a sparse school district, or they have unique learning needs. And those get into your different special education determinations, things like ELL, and other matters. So students can qualify in some cases. If it's a fairly severe learning disability, they can get almost, in excess of 100% more additional funds. The base and the weights are things which are paid for between the state and local government. What we estimate out of this and what the state said when they presented their education budget was this $215 in the base, that increase from the $68.60 to $7,075. $129 of that increase they thought they anticipated would need to be covered, need to cover the increase in teacher salary. They thought $47 in additional costs would be there to pay for increases in benefits, both insurance and retirement contributions. And then the other $39 were there for overall inflationary increases, just with other costs of the school system. So even though we've gone to a funding formula that's giving you a flat amount per pupil, they're still looking back at some overall cost increase in the system to say, what do we think it's going to cost to pay for these teacher raises, pay for teacher benefits, and other inflationary costs. And then they're backing that into how much of an increase they need to put into the base per pupil. Check real quick. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. Has additional money been put in TCSA for more school nurses? No, it has not. And listen, that's what's interesting is that TCSA no longer funds the resources of the positions in the school system. So they don't, even though they're saying we need $129 for salary improvements, they're figuring that outside the formula and then backing into it. So they don't put in a certain amount for how many teaching positions you have anymore, or nurses, or school transportation, or other items like that. They're coming up with a lump sum total that they think needs to be funded, and then dividing that by the number of pupils out there to back it into a base. Let's see if we had another question before that one. Is there a way to predict if additional local tax dollars will be needed further down the road in the outlier years? I think one of the best ways of trying to predict and determine that is to get a good indication of where, how many teachers you have and where they fall on the salary schedule. If your school system is already paying in advance and well above what the state required salary schedule is, then I think, you know, that's going to be an indication you won't need as much as far as additional local dollars. If you're paying at the minimum, or right now you're paying at a minimum that's below the 44.5 that it's going to jump to, obviously you're going to have to put in some to bump that up. And that will kind of continue to happen over the next 2 to 3 years. So like I said, I think I may not have made this point earlier, but something else we wanted to highlight was the fact that you're going to get money from the state for teacher compensation for the next 2 to 3 years as they are moving the salary schedule up. Like I said, it went to from 40,000 to 42,000 in the budget year we just are finishing now. It goes from 42 to 44.5 this year, then to 47 next year, and then to the 50,000 the year after that. Each year as they're doing this, they are earmarking a portion of this improvement in the base. And so technically they're both earmarking state and local funds because we share the funding for the base. So they can, the TCSA formula, the statute that enacts that allows them to do that. So they set aside this year $125 million of the improvements to the base. And that would be around, I think it's around 87 million state and the rest local, that are reserved and have to be spent on increases to compensation for existing teachers. So that is money that is coming to you from the state and is going to be earmarked and has to be spent on increases. They've made this change in the language to say increases to salary for existing teachers as a way the legislature was trying to say of making sure money they want to have spent on raises goes to raises. There were some cases under the BEP where they would send down additional money for teacher compensation in some school systems, and this may have been the best choice for them, but some school systems would use that not to pay raises across the board, but to hire additional teachers. So this money that you're getting right now, you cannot use, if it's earmarked for increases for existing teachers, it can't be used to fund additional teaching positions. There may be other compensation money that you want to use to do that, but this portion of it that is going to be received by your school system earmarked for raises has to go to existing teachers. The curious thing is we talked about this. Stop sharing here. Every single teacher across your system does not have to get the same increase. So there was a $2,500 jump for those at the minimum level of that 0 year of experience and just a bachelor's degree. They have to get that amount, but you're not required to give that same amount to everybody so long as they fit within those categories of the state, those very few categories in the state salary schedule. They acknowledge that in one of the finance committees this year before the legislature that this is not funding a $2,500 raise across the board for everybody. It's raising the minimum step $2,500. And like I said, beyond that, they leave flexibility to your school system to determine how to spread that money out across all teachers. Now, if they are like the Sullivan County schedule that we had up there earlier, where there's when you raise the minimum, there's 30 years worth of step increases across the board that go up. then that could end up meaning every teacher gets some degree of a raise, but they're not all going to be getting the same raise, at least not under the state minimum salary schedule. Any questions at this point? You can either pop them in the chat or unmute if you want to ask a question. All right, well, these were some of the main things we had talked about and wanted to highlight for you all just to kind of get an understanding of how this money is coming. And like I said, to some counties that have asked me about, do we need to go ahead and jump to the 50,000 this year? You can do that, but the point I've made is that you're going to continue as they earmarked 125 million this year for teacher raises. There will be portions of your additional TCSA funding in next year and the following year after that, and possibly going on in the future, that are going to be earmarked that have to be spent on raises. So it's not like you can get to 50,000 this year and then just sit pat and hold, because some of the money that you're going to be getting from the state is going to be required to be spent on raises. So if you jump to 50,000 this year, you're going to have to continue to have those increases the next couple of years. Question is, are pre-K kids counted towards TCSA funding? They are not, it's my understanding. I think that's outside of the TCSA funding formula. Sorry, I couldn't tell exactly if that was a question or just some background noise. All right, any other questions out there? Y'all seem to be kind of a quiet group this afternoon. Okay, this is all stuff that maybe is elementary and you guys have known about for a while. Just kind of thought we would highlight it again. In particular, I think some of the information about the state salary schedule and how that differs from your local school system isn't something that everybody was familiar with, at least some of the commissioners I've talked to. So thought that may clarify. All right, and we probably heard at the start of this session when we began it, we are recording this one. We can, we'll have it posted up. It takes a little while to get it all cleaned up, and then we'll put it up on our website with a link. So if you've got somebody in your county you wished had been on this and seen it, we will, it'll be available to watch later on recording. So we will get that up on our YouTube channel probably early next week, if not before then. All right, put out one last call for questions. If nobody's got any, we can go ahead and wrap things up here. All right. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And so things are going smoothly with your budgets out there, and that the funding is helping to cover the cost of these increases. So appreciate you joining us. Everybody be safe. Have a good weekend and stay out of downtown Nashville. It's going to be crazy this weekend. All right.
Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you.